Hi, my name is Theodore Harrison, and today I'm going to share with you my final for Columns 117. It's Tyler Perry Madea Goes to Jail, Exploitation of Black Crime and Mass Incarceration. So I know some are you saying, really? Is that really a serious subject? And I would suggest to you that how the media frames events really constrains or confines how audiences can interpret these events. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. If I said to you, there's a problem with white crime, we need to do something about white crime, many of you would say, explain that a little bit more. But if I said to you black crime, many of you would already have a picture, a preconceived notion of what that means. So let's look at how that's constructed through media framing. Here we have an ad that appears on a social networking site, and it's an ad for anyone to request their own personal criminal history background. And here they've used a picture of a black male to represent crime itself. And if you multiply that by 800 million users, you begin to see how the black crime is constructed. If you look a little bit closer, you can see that on the original left, the guy was already having a bad day. But you can see that the picture is clearly altered to make him look subhuman and appear menacing, and that in a nutshell is how they framed the issue of black crime, where you instantly with the name you associate certain faces, certain types, certain people. But what does that have to do with Tyler Perry? Well, Tyler Perry's was listed as the highest paid man in entertainment from 2010 to 2011. He made about $130 million. He's made about 12 movies, and they've grossed about $600 million, which is about $50 million each. But most importantly, people or scholars who have researched his work have found that he basically has a monopoly on how African Americans are portrayed in media. But who is Tyler Perry? What does Tyler Perry, how does he make his films? So what I'm going to do for you now is play a short clip that'll specifically tell you about his movies and how he makes them. And you can see from that he states he's very specific in his storytelling and he understands his audience. If you compare Tyler Perry's success with that of another popular filmmaker, Spike Lee, you can see that this storytelling, this format that he uses has been very successful. And he is one of those special individuals who has the power to change images of African Americans. And there are scholars such as Bell Hood who believe that people on the margin such as him have a responsibility to use that power in changing the images. And so that brings us to the hypothesis was that Tyler Perry uses counter-hegemonic themes in this movie Madea Goes to Jail 2009, and that those counter-hegemonic things will disrupt historically negative stereotypes of African Americans. So our methodology is where we discuss how we test this hypothesis. So the first thing is our assumption is that mass incarceration has already occurred, and it's based primarily on the work of Michelle Alexander and her book from 2010. And there are statistics in addition to that to support that mass incarceration has already occurred. So here you see the population of the U.S. versus Caribbean in Latin America, and where that becomes important is the largest country in Latin America is Brazil. And you can see that in the U.S., African American males are incarcerated. There are more of them incarcerated than the entire population of incarceration in Brazil. And our second assumption is that American hegemony is dominant and pervasive in mass media. And that basically establishes that the stereotypes and images that we believe that he is going to disrupt are already present. And we've relied on previous scholars for that. But why pick that movie? What's that movie? If we line up all 12 of his movies, we see one that stands out. That is Madea Goes to Jail. It made about $90 million. It was #1 in the box office for about 3 weeks in America. And it has all his major figures. And you can see the average in the red regression line was about $50 million, so it's well above that. So it was selected for a critical case sampling based on that. Our method of coding, how we code the movie to look for and test our hypothesis, was based on Cedric Clark's model of minority representation. So the first stage of it is where there's no recognition. They're not recognized at all. The second is ridicule, where they're portrayed as stupid, lazy, irrational, or simply laughable. The third stage is regulation, where they're presented as forces or administrators of the dominant group norm. And the last stage is respect, where they're portrayed no differently. So let's look at how some examples of that model so we have an understanding. This would be an example of the ridicule, where they're portrayed as silly, laughable. In the next stage, what you saw when you got towards the 50s or 60s, or even into early part, the 70s, you begin to see where they're portrayed as the enforcers of the dominant group's norms. And here in the 80s, 90s, you begin to see respect, where they're portrayed no differently than any other group. So if we're looking for counter-hegemony, we would see the disruption of ridicule and regulation, and we would see respect in different forms, but we would see respect. Conversely, if we saw negative stereotypes, they would be in the form of ridicule. You'd see minorities in the role of regulation, and you would only see token representations of respect or anything of that sort. So we divided the movie into 48 scenes using video editing software, and we coded it using a Excel spreadsheet. We use ethnographic content analysis to verify the theoretical relationships of the coding. And so what were our results? The results were a hypothesis was rejected, meaning that there was no counter-hegemony there. There was no attempt to disrupt historical stereotypes of African American. And specifically, there was ridicule and there was regulation. And here's an example of the regulation, where you have minorities playing judges, and they appear as regulators of the dominant group's norm. You also have dominant group members appear as helpers of the oppressed. So here you have Dr. Phil as a counselor for one of Madea. And you also had ridicule and disdain between African Americans. And we also have ridicule and glorification. Here we have the use of marijuana with the oxygen tanks. So what does this all mean? Does this have any meaning? Does this have any purpose? Well, one conclusion came to was the normalization of mass incarceration. And we based that on portraying African Americans as no different than anyone else in the criminal justice system. And we've discussed earlier the incarceration rates and how they're incarcerated differently. None of that's addressed in the movie. None of the drug war and its result on that, where you have about 50% higher conviction rate for African American males, and about 80% of some black males in large cities have criminal records. And you can see there where it suggests that it's their own fault. And I would suggest that that's the conclusion for the normalization. But if we look also at the conclusion of stereotypes of black crime being used as entertainment, we can see an example here. We also see other examples where there is sexual assault and prostitution. And this movie received a Kids' Choice Award, nomination for a Kids' Choice Award. And the target audience for that is about 6 to 13-year-old. So it creates that black crime stereotype to an entirely new generation who are still forming their opinions. And he fails at one of his central tasks as a black producer is to change the perceptions of African Americans. But what happens when you don't use the power to make those changes? As one scholar noted, you literally pull the trigger on assassination, image assassination for African Americans. You also see where stereotypes that people see cause them to take actions that they may later look back and may not have been reasonable. So clearly there's a broader social issue to this, and that concludes my presentation. I would like to thank the following people for their help. Thank you.